Our speaker today is Rabbi Adam Scheier. Rabbi Scheier is the rabbi of the congregation Shaar Hashomayim in Westmount. He is the past president of the Montreal Board of Rabbis, vice president of the Rabbinical Council of Canada, and a senior rabbinic fellow of Jerusalem's Hartman Institute. Rabbi Scheier is a founding member of the Board of Trustees of the International Rabbinic Fellowship, which is a leading modern Orthodox organization consisting of over 200 rabbis, communal scholars, and clergy. He also serves on the Rabbinic Advisory Board of Yeshivat Maharat, the first institution to train Orthodox women as spiritual leaders. He is proud to lead the first synagogue to hire a graduate of Yeshivat Maharat. Prior to his arrival to Montreal in 2004, originally from New Jersey, am I right? I'm not sure.
Rochester, New York.
Rochester, New York. So you came really far north. Prior to his arrival here in 2004, he participated in the founding and the development of the first yeshiva in post-World War II Germany, and has continued to work extensively with the immigrant Jewish community in Germany. Rabbi Scheier has been an advocate for spiritual activism on behalf of Jews around the world. He's led solidarity visits to many different communities, including Paris, Montana, and Venezuela. In 2010, he testified before a Canadian parliamentary committee on the topic of human rights in Venezuela. In 2015, Rabbi Scheier co-edited and published the Canadian Haggadah Canadienne, which has received positive acclaim in Canada and worldwide. The Haggadah, if I'm explaining this properly, is basically a guide to the presentation of a Seder.
Exactly it.
In July 2016, he was honored to accompany Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on his visit to Poland and Auschwitz. Rabbi Scheier has published editorial pieces in the Gazette, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Times of Israel, the Canadian Jewish News, and many other publications. He's married and has 5 daughters. So you've got to be a devout man to have 5 daughters and a wife all in the same household, Adam. So without further ado, I present you Rabbi Adam Scheier.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction and for the invitation. I just want to first begin by offering personal gratitude to David Franklin and Sarah, as they've become what we consider close personal friends over the years that we've been blessed to know them. And he was the one who reached out first to invite me to share these words with you. So I'm very grateful for that and grateful to be here. My topic, or the topic that I was asked to address, is the role and history of Shaar Hashomayim, which is my community, and the importance of community. And I'm going to speak for, I'm hoping it's going to be around 15 to 20 minutes, and then open it up for questions if there are. I'll speak a little bit about history and speak a little bit about what we're doing today in terms of our attempts to be community-minded and to play what we hope is a positive role in the community around us. So just firstly, who we are. Congregation Shaar Hashomayim is the largest synagogue community in Montreal, in all of the entire province of Quebec. It's the second largest synagogue in Canada. There's one in Toronto that is larger than we are. We have around 1,300 member families. In terms of denominations, there are lots of different ways to be Jewish. We espouse the beliefs and the philosophies of what's known as modern Orthodoxy. And so one of the reasons why our size, or the number of members, is unique to us is because a modern Orthodox community, or Orthodox community anyway, they tend to be neighborhood based. They tend to really, because of the laws of driving on the Sabbath and not having mobility on the Sabbath day, they tend to be a little bit smaller because it's really about the neighborhood feel. The majority of our members are not Sabbath observant, but very much appreciate these rules and abide by the community's adherence of these rules while they're here within the community. But that virtue of being centered and focused on the community, we're very much a Westmount synagogue, even though our members come from all over the city. We're very much, we take that responsibility of being a Westmount synagogue very, very, very seriously. We are, again, 1,300 member families. And just to give the global perspective, there are almost 400,000 Jews in all of Canada. Of those, around 90,000 in Montreal. And of the 90,000, let's say 1,300 families represents, let's be generous, 3,000 people. So we're 3,000 people out of 90,000 Jews in all of Montreal. So we're a very small portion of the Jewish community of Montreal. But if you go back 100 years, 200 years, this is what there is. When you spoke about the Jewish community of Canada, you were talking about Montreal. And when you spoke about the Jewish community of Montreal, you were probably talking about Shaar Hashomayim. So I want to take a step back and just go back historically for a few moments. If you'll excuse me for a second, I have to adjust something on my computer, because one of the things with COVID is that we spend so much time looking at ourselves. And the way my screen was just calibrated until I just fixed it, I was just looking at a big picture of myself. But now I've taken a little bit of a zoom out and I can see all of you. So I'm very grateful for that. There even is a function on Zoom for those who are particularly self-conscious to hide your own self-view, so you don't have to look at yourself at all. But I was speaking to a friend who's actually a plastic surgeon, who is telling me that the numbers during COVID have skyrocketed because we're all spending way too much time looking at ourselves, which is not my favorite view. Let's be honest. This isn't my best side. Okay, so we're looking back at the Jewish community of Canada, and really the story begins well before Confederation. The story begins in the 1730s, when the first Jew, and many are surprised, many who are not familiar with the story are actually surprised to learn that the first Jew in Canada was a Jewish woman. In 1738, a woman named Esther Brandau. She came from France. She left the port of Bordeaux, disguised as a man. Disguised not only as a man, but as a Roman Catholic man, because Louis XIV had decreed that only Roman Catholics were permitted to settle here in New France. And as well, a single woman could never have made the trip alone. So Esther Brandau, disguised as Jacques Lafarge, gets onto a boat in Bordeaux, reaches the port of Quebec, disembarks, and tries to pass herself off as a Jewish man looking for work. Did not succeed. She was, as a Roman Catholic Jewish man, she did not succeed. She was soon sent back. Probably, I don't know the minutiae of the historical record as to whether there was a penalty or a punishment for misrepresenting herself, but she soon found herself back in France, unsuccessful in her deceptive attempt to settle in New France. That's 1738. And that's the one Jew who's there. And then you fast forward another 2 decades and probably no Jews until the French and Indian War, 1754 to the 1760s. And suddenly you have, with the British troops, you have many Jews who are coming in with the British troops. So the first Jewish settlers are coming in the 1750s and in the 1760s. And the first synagogue is built by British Jewish citizens in 1768. That's the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. So get that, there are 30 years between when this French woman disguises herself and tries to get into Canada and the first synagogue being established, which was called the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. Why the Spanish and Portuguese? If they were British and Western European people who were here, for the very simple reason is that Spanish and Portuguese was the religion of the New World. It was the denomination of Judaism in the New World. There was a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in New York. There was the Bevis Mark synagogue in London. And the ones who were settling here wanted to create an affiliation with the New World and with the rest of the British Empire, or it was going to be the British at the time. They wanted to create that sense. The Truro Synagogue in Rhode Island was part of the Spanish and Portuguese kingdom. And in Montreal, they wanted to be part of that world. And so these people who normally would have had an Anglo-Jewish synagogue established a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. And that was the only synagogue in Canada for about 80 years. That's in the 1760s. Fast forward 1846, there's a new wave of immigration. Immigrants from from Germany have come in. But let me take a step back for a moment. Who were the members of the Spanish and Portuguese? And I want to just focus on really on two of them that might have some familiarity for students of history amongst us. One, so again, the original Spanish and Portuguese established in 1768. So 1 year prior to the establishment, a young boy was born, Ezekiel Hart, one of the original Hart brothers. His father, Aaron Hart, had moved from Germany to Quebec, was part of the founding of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. And when his son Ezekiel was 1 year old, that's when that happened. And Ezekiel was born in Trois-Rivières, in Three Rivers, as they called it. And he became part of his claim to fame is that he was a member of the Assembly of the Province of Canada's at that time in 1808. He actually was created a little bit of a stir because he was elected, but he refused to take the oath on the Christian Bible. And as was the matter, they would cover their head with one hand because Jews wear a head covering, a kippah, and put his other hand on the Jewish Bible. And an objection was raised the next day by the Attorney General, which was seconded by the Chief Justice, basically that the oath was not taken in the manner required for sitting in the assembly because he would have to swear, quote, on the true faith of a Christian, and he couldn't do that, so his candidacy was challenged. That was Ezekiel Hart, one of Ezekiel Hart's, and he was one of the prominent members of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, which his father founded. One further descendant going forward another century in the 1920s is another very familiar name, which is Dr. David Hart, who is famous for donating trophies. He donated a trophy to the National Hockey League for the most valuable player, the Hart Trophy. And so you have this, this pedigree of Jewish involvement in community, certainly within the Hart family. Ezekiel Hart had a younger brother whose name was Benjamin. And at a certain point, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue was meeting in Benjamin's basement. And he, together with another individual, built a new synagogue on what today is Cheneville and de Gauchetière, which is around the Palais de Congrès is there now. That's where the Spanish and Portuguese, they built a new building in 1838, 6 years before Shaar Hashomayim was founded. Moses Judah Hayes was his partner in this construction. And Hayes is very well known for having, he's a very successful businessman. He owned property at Dalhousie Square, which I think is now Viger, I believe is where it was. His residence, Hayes House, actually hosted the Parliament of Canada after it was burned, and so on. But he's very well known to Westmounters because Moses Judah Hayes, who was the chief, I believe, the chief of police. He was, I don't know if it was a political appointment or a professional appointment, but he was the chief of police, and he built 4 homes in Westmount, which is Metcalfe Terrace. Those are Moses Judah Hayes, though, 2 remaining on the corner of Metcalfe and Côte Saint-Antoine, which is right around the corner from our synagogue, were part of the contribution of Moses Judah Hayes. So these are the original leaders of the Spanish and Portuguese of the Jewish community of Canada, which is really the Jewish community of Montreal, which is really the Jewish community of the Spanish and Portuguese. Come 1846, 175 years ago, and a new group of Jews have come in. They're coming from Poland, they're coming from Germany, they continue to come from Great Britain, and they want from England. And it's time to establish a new community, and that community is Shaar Hashomayim. We are, and now today, the largest synagogue in Quebec. We are a breakaway. We were very simply, in 1846, a group of Jews said, we need a second synagogue. One synagogue is not enough for us, so we are certainly a breakaway. Our history began, they had a storefront which was on the corner of St. James Street and St. Gabriel. It's an intersection that no longer exists today, but that was the first location, 1846, of Shaar Hashomayim. It's actually right on the east side of the courthouse. I think there's a little park right next to the courthouse. That was the original place of Shaar Hashomayim. The second building was on what today is de Bouillon, which then was St. Constance Street. That was a beautiful synagogue, then was built on 59 McGill College Avenue in 1885. The community, over the course of 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, is growing and growing from a handful of people who are taking out a storefront to becoming this major center of Jewish life, until finally in the 1920s, they realized they need a new permanent home. And synagogue tradition is that they had two possibilities for where this new home would be. One was in the western suburb of Westmount, which is where there were a few country homes. Again, Moses Judah Hayes had his house here. There are others who are building country homes in Westmount to supplement their downtown mansions. So do we go west? And there is, a lot has been written on this, on the Jewish community migration westward. That's a typical thing that happens in cities. Or, so that's option number one. Option number two is that they had a tract of land that was offered to them, or that somebody had owned and was going to give it to the synagogue, on the corner of Atwater and St. Catherine Street, on the western corner, which is where Alexis Neon is today. And synagogue tradition has it that at the meeting of the congregation, they had a decision to make, which is, do we compete with the Montreal Canadiens across the street, or do we move to Westmount? And they moved to Westmount. And it was a very wise decision. That was almost 100 years ago today. 1922 was the founding of the building in which I'm sitting right now. I want to speak just for a brief moment about architecture, because that's a major focus of our congregation, but it also says a great deal about what we are, where we came from. The McGill College Avenue Synagogue was a very small building. I don't know how many seats it had, but it was built in what's known as the Moorish architecture style, with twin minarets. It looked a little bit, there was an Oriental look, what we might associate with an Oriental look with it. The new synagogue in Westmount was built as like a basilica type of plan, with a central entrance, and it was built in the Neo-Byzantine style with a big dome. And so you emerge from this more Oriental style, this more exotic style of architecture, to an architecture that, of course, was very, very popular in houses of worship and in general. Not only that, to build this new synagogue in 1920, 1921, when they're commissioning this, to build the new synagogue, they hired a very prominent Montreal architect, Melville Miller, who was also the architect, I believe, of the Atwater Library and of the Shriners Hospital in Cedar, and of a number of other buildings of communal prominence in Montreal. And in the grand European style of synagogues, many synagogues were built drawn back from the street. There's a courtyard, there's a gate outside, you have to get into the gate, you have to move into the courtyard, and then you see the synagogue building. That was a traditional style of synagogue architecture. At the beginning of the 20th century in Germany and here as well, when they're building these new, of course, with new financial abilities and with the ability to invest in a synagogue building, suddenly you see these amazing, majestic buildings that are not only impressive in terms of their size, but are impressive in terms of the fact that they're built right on the street. That is, for us, a very important symbol of that we are here, that we're not hiding behind a courtyard or behind gates. Anyone who wants to can just come right up to the doors of the synagogue. We're right here on the street, on Cote Street or Cote Saint-Antoine, which is where the original synagogue building in 1922 was built. A major renovation was done in 1968 to our building. The original building housed 950 people. It sat 950 congregants in the main sanctuary. By the time the 1960s came along and the baby boom and the synagogue had exploded to 1,600, 1,700 families at that point, pre-Exodus and post-baby boom pre-Exodus, which is the heyday of so many communities in Montreal. They needed a new space, and so the synagogue more than doubled in size in terms of the size of the campus, and they built a sanctuary that seats close to 1,800 people, 1,900 people as well. I want to just pivot for a moment to the synagogue and the community, because that's a very important piece or component to the role that we play within the community and the role that the community plays in our lives. When I first came to Shaar Hashomayim in 2004, I interviewed May 2004. I began working here in August of 2004. And one of there were two moments that people spoke to me about in recent history. What makes Shaar Hashomayim Shaar Hashomayim? So one moment was post September 11th, the Saturday or the holiday right after September 11th, 2001, right after the Twin Towers came down, the attack on freedom, the attack on New York City. I was actually living in Manhattan at the time. And the moment that the Saturday after, the congregation invited members of the local fire department to come to synagogue services and gave them a standing ovation in gratitude. And that shows a certain outlook of a community to think about our neighbors in that way, to welcome them inside. That's just a certain orientation. That's number one. That's what they told me about. The other thing they told me about was that in 1999, during the ice storm in Montreal, that Shaar Hashomayim, given that we have backup generators, opened our doors for our neighbors, and that 250 people slept here for a number of nights, and that we served 600 meals a day. And, you know, not to say this to pat ourselves on the back for doing something nice for our neighbors, but to show that this is part of who we see ourselves as being, as if we can help. We don't differentiate between religious outlook or levels of observance or anything. If you need a warm place to sleep, and we have a generator, come on down and we'll feed you as well. And that would be our greatest honor. Another example, I think, of our synagogue's outward posture is actually a program that we're doing this coming Monday. And I'm sharing this not to get you to come to the program or sign up to the program, but just to share the way that we think and the kind of things that we do. So there's a very well-known restaurant in Montreal, Beauty's Luncheonette. So I will tell you about, I keep kosher. Eating kosher, part of my religious observance, means that I cannot eat at Beauty's. It means that much of what they serve there is simply not, it means that I limit myself by choice, and it's a great delight, and this is part of my religious observance. There are probably about 7 or 8 or 9 restaurants in Montreal that I and my family can eat at. That's just life. Montreal, with this great culinary landscape, there are just a handful of restaurants, and the rest we observe from afar, and we hear the reviews, and we say, okay, it's probably pretty good, but I'll never eat there. And I read in the newspaper last week that Beauty's is reopening after being closed for renovation. And when that happens, a bulb goes off, because I grew up in Rochester, New York. One of the members of the Jewish community in Rochester, New York, was a Burger King franchise owner. Burger King also very much not kosher. I can't eat there. But when they would open a new Burger King, before any of the non-kosher materials came in, they would host kosher night for the Jewish community. And we would all come, because if you can't eat at Burger King, what you can't have seems like the most tempting thing in the world. And now I have no desire to eat at Burger King. But back then, as a 10-year-old king, there's no greater joy than walking into a Burger King and eating kosher food, because it's the only time in my life. So I decided, you know what? Beauty's Luncheonette is going to be kosher for one night only, this coming Monday night. We've sent it out to our community today, and they are so excited, because we're going to get to eat some of the Beauty specials. We put together a special kosher menu, and it's actually quite exciting for us, because it's a way of integrating that Montreal identity, which Beauty's is a part of the Montreal culinary landscape, and our own religious observance, because they have everything's brand new in the kitchen. It becomes actually quite easy to change some ingredients. It's going to be great, and we're very excited about that. So that's just another example of ways in which we see ourselves as part of a community. We run programs such as Shabbat in the Park, which is something designed for Saturday afternoons for our Sabbath. And we have a beautiful, here at the synagogue, we have a beautiful venue. We have outdoor spaces, indoor spaces. We could do everything here, but that would almost miss the point, because part of the way we see ourselves in the community is to be out there. So to be out there at Murray Hill Park with a group of young families pre-pandemic, but we'll come back to it again soon, singing songs and celebrating Shabbat together and being a part of community and people listening to us and people watching it. That's our absolutely our greatest joy. We have in the synagogue, in the upstairs lobby of the synagogue, we have a list of members who have been honored with the Order of Canada or Order of Quebec. It's a significant list of members of Shaar Hashomayim, of our synagogue, who have been honored. And the reason we put that there is because that speaks to our mission, which is not to be there only for the Jewish community, but to be there for all of Montreal, to be there for all of Quebec, to be there for all of Canada. And we get great pride. We derive great pleasure from seeing the success of our members in the general community, so much so that we celebrate it by post. And if you look at that list, you will see you'll see the name of Senator Leo Kolber, who was a great Canadian and a member a member of our synagogue. You'll see Sheila Feinstein, a member of Parliament, and her family as members of our synagogue. You'll see Erwin Kotler, who has achieved so much in terms of Canada and human rights, and we're proud that he's a member of our synagogue. You'll see leading families like the Bronfman family and the Steinberg family. In fact, Sam Steinberg, the late Sam Steinberg, was the chairman of the 1967 or 66, 67 expansion committee, or construction committee of the synagogue. And he insisted that while the synagogue was under construction, that we put a big sign outside that said "Open for Business," because that's what he did at his stores at Steinberg's when they did construction. They still wanted to let people know they were open for business. And he felt at a synagogue, it should be the exact same thing, that people should know, even though there are construction crews here, we are still running prayers. In 1967, at Expo 67, our synagogue, under the leadership of the late Rabbi Shushat, who was the rabbi here for a generation, passed away just a few years ago, together with Alan Bronfman and Sam Steinberg, put together the Pavilion of Judaism at Expo 67, which was a major point of pride for our community. And an additional point of pride was that our community supplied a prayer service, a daily prayer service at the Pavilion of Judaism on the Expo grounds, that we held a daily prayer service at the Pavilion of Judaism. That was a major a point of pride for our community. Another prominent member in terms of impact on the world around us is, of course, the late Leonard Cohen. Was a member, not only was he a member of the synagogue, but his grandfather, Lion Cohen, was president of our synagogue. His great-grandfather, Lazarus Cohen, was also president of our synagogue for many, many years. And they were great leaders in the Montreal Jewish community in their own right. I have a little bit of show and tell, which I'll hold up for you. We have this book right here, which I came across just a number of years ago. It's the one side is the religious school, the other side is the Hebrew school register of the synagogue. And inside, this is going back, it's just a book. It says Hebrew school on the front, but I'll open it up for you and show you that inside they have a list of students who are signed up for the Hebrew school. I don't know if this is the graduation roster, but this is in 1949, Tuesday, the third day of Sivan, which is the Hebrew month, corresponding to May 31st, 1949. And if you can see, let me get it with the camera, that the second line right there next to my finger, you can see 599 Belmont is Leonard Cohen's signature as a 13-year-old, I suppose, I haven't done the math, but as a young boy signing in to study here at the synagogue. And so we're part of the pride of, and this, I don't think this has ever been seen in public. So you may be the first people to see that treasure of Leonard Cohen history. But part of the pride of our community is not only, affiliations, but the fact that he grew up here. And the fact that when we hear the words of his songs of Who by Fire, well, that's part of the Jewish liturgy on the high holidays. That's a prayer. It's a Jewish prayer. Who by Fire is a Jewish prayer. The words to Hallelujah are all part of the Jewish rituals, which he learned sitting next to his father, sitting next to his grandparents, sitting next to his great-grandparents, and the connections that he had with the generations was quite significant. In fact, when it came time to prepare for his burial, that was something that was very important to him, was to be buried in the Shaar Hashomayim cemetery back here in Montreal, next to his parents and next to his grandparents and next to his great-grandparents as well, all in a row in our community's cemetery. I'll close and be happy to entertain questions if there are, by saying just about, this is, the idea is Shaar Hashomayim and the community around us and our interactions with the community, our connection to the community. And we see ourselves as a community that's there for others, that's in solidarity with others. When something happens in the world, we want to be there, we want to offer support. And unfortunately, this past year, we were on the receiving end of an unfortunate act against our community when in January someone came to our synagogue with a canister of gasoline and drew some very hateful symbols on the doors of our synagogue. Remember, those are the doors that we're so proud are on the street, are there to be open for all and access to all. And unfortunately, because of security concerns, these are not new, those doors had to be locked. And the fact that they were locked probably saved lives for us, because the first thing he tried to do was to open the doors. But the connections that we felt and the solidarity that we felt, and I even see someone on this call who I spoke with right after who sent a lovely, lovely note. And don't want to single them out, but just understanding that what it meant to us to feel a part of this community, that people who are not of the Jewish faith but live close by. We heard from many people who say, I walk by your building all the time. I feel like it's part of me, and even though I've never been inside, or even though I've only been inside for select occasions, the fact that we're in the same community, the fact that we walk the same streets, the fact that we share so much in terms of values and objectives means that I'm feeling the severity of this attack as well, even though I'm not a member of the Jewish community. And that meant the world to us. So I'm very, very grateful to all who did that. I've also been very fortunate because of that to make some really great new connections in my life that I very, very much appreciate. So I'm going to close with that, because I think I've only gone probably 12 or 13 minutes over my allotted time, and which is pretty good for a rabbi, I think. And then if there are any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them. I see there's
we have a few here, Rabbi Adam.
Yeah.
A couple of them have been answered. How many congregants now? We know that you have 1,300 families. How many synagogues are there in Montreal?
Sure. Well, let me just take a step back. So 1,300 families are families who pay membership to the synagogue. But of course, as with any religious community, we serve lots of different kinds of people. And people come in without paying, and that's great if they can't. We also created an initiative this past winter to bring food, to use our kitchen. Our kitchen staff was working full-time throughout the pandemic. And this winter, we created a new initiative called Shaar Cares. And we sent food out to the members of our community. We sent food out beyond our community. And we started weekly deliveries to 2 homeless shelters that are essentially in our neighborhood, or close enough by that we consider them part of our neighborhood. So when, 1,300 families, we also, just being close to downtown, close to lots of other communities, we see our community as being much more expansive than that number. Not that anyone is looking for numbers or records or anything like that, but 1,300 families pay membership to Shaar Hashomayim, but the families we serve are certainly greater. How many synagogues in Montreal now? Hundreds. I don't know. I don't know the exact number, but as I mentioned before, lots of different flavors and types of Judaism. You have, to give a few examples, you'll have a number of synagogues that are affiliated with the conservative movement. You have a synagogue that's affiliated down the block from us that's affiliated with the Reform movement. You have a synagogue in Hampstead that's affiliated with the Reconstructionist movement. You have 50 synagogues that are Hasidic in nature that are going to be found in Outremont. There's also a group that lives in Boisbriand, and they have their own, and that's a group of Hungarian Hasidim, which is different than Polish Hasidim, because Hungarians, well, it's different in lots of different ways, but after the Second World War, Hungarians, because that was the last place that the Germans went to, they had a place to go back to. They still had their homes after the war. So many of them resettled in Hungary and only left when the communists came in, as opposed to the Polish Jews who had nowhere to go because they had been out of their homes for 4 or 5 years. There was nothing left for them, so they came as refugees. So the Hungarian Jews came a little bit later. That's why many of them came to Montreal. And you could go on within those, and modern Orthodox as well. Modern Orthodox, define modern Orthodox. Modern Orthodox is it's a hard thing to do. It's a philosophy. It's grounded in both religious philosophy and secular philosophy. It's a type of orthodoxy that's deeply connected with the world. I could give mundane examples, which are that, I am both Sabbath observant and an ardent fan of the National Football League. So, we value secular education. We value advanced education. It's an integrated life into society. We celebrate when our members of our community achieve in their own respective fields, and not just within the Jewish community. And at the same time, we are unapologetically Orthodox, which means that we eat only kosher food, which means that we observe the Sabbath. It means I do not turn on or off a light on the Sabbath. We don't watch television on the Sabbath. Let me give just a good example. I have one of my daughters is and let me just say, this is the only part that's off the record for Martin. This is the only part, because I'm going to talk about my kid. So that's the only part that's off the record. So one of my children is a basketball. That doesn't even begin to describe. She's an NBA fan, and she has her favorite players, which are on a number of different teams. She collects jerseys of those players, that she has the superstitious belief that if she wears the jersey while the player is playing, it helps that player's performance. So she looks at the times of the games, and if the game starts at 7:30, by 7:28, you don't have to look in the paper or online to find what time the game. Just look at her and what jersey she's wearing. That's what team is playing. On Friday nights, we don't watch television. So at the Friday night Sabbath table, there are times where she'll excuse herself for a moment and come back wearing a jersey. Because while she's not wearing the game, that doesn't, absolve her of her responsibility to help her team out by wearing their jerseys. So that may be a good snapshot of modern Orthodoxy. We are not watching those games. Will not turn on. It could be Game 7 of Stanley Cup, my favorite team. It could be whatever it is. If it's the Sabbath, Sabbath comes first. Family comes first. I will not watch that game, but I might wear the jersey because that's still who I am.
So will you record it?
Will I record it? That's an excellent question. Yeah, you could theoretically record it, watch it later. There have been times, we will admit, that we will turn our phones off, of course, for Sabbath, and not turn them on until we've watched the game. So in case we receive text messages congratulating us on a victory or consoling us on a defeat, we want the experience of watching the game, even if it's not live. You still want that experience. So it's a good question.
Very cool. I have another question here. A little more personal, but you have 5 daughters, and all their names begin with the letter A?
Hmm.
Explain that.
Well, my wife is Abby, and I am Adam. And then along came Avia in 2006. And, nothing conscious ever happened. I actually, there's a young couple in our community whose first names start with the letter M. And they just had their first child whose name starts with an M. And I told them, I said, be careful with the second child, because your decision today will have an impact for many, many years. What we tell people is that our first 5 children, all their names start with the letter A. Who knows?
The next 5 can be B's.
Exactly.
I'll open it up. Are there any other questions? Anybody want to unmute themselves and come in?
I have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was really, really interesting. I'm very curious, with 5 daughters, are there any professions that are off limits to them within modern Orthodoxy?
It's an excellent question. The answer is no. The answer is we want them to achieve the highest level of whatever it is. There's very little there's nothing in the world that a man can do that a woman cannot do within the modern Orthodox Jewish tradition. Something that's a challenge to that in our traditional community is the value that's placed on the home, is the value that's placed on parenting, is the value that's placed on motherhood. So there's often competing values, social values, but not from an educational perspective, and not necessarily even from a religious perspective. I have just to give some examples, I have a sister-in-law who's a physician and an author, and a published author for young adult novels, as an Orthodox woman, and nothing stops her, and nobody thinks twice about anything. So our dreams for our children are the same as every parent's dreams for their children, which is that they'll find their way of contributing to the world. But there's no limit as to what trade they'll take up, about what profession they'll pursue, what they'll study. Zero.
So your daughter could become a basketball player.
I hope so. Look, that was my dream at a certain point in my life, and she actually is quite good. We just put up a basketball hoop, I think to the chagrin of our neighbors. We put a basketball hoop in the back of the house, and she is out there many, many hours a day, honing her skills, working on certain things. She's very purposeful in that. She'll do the same shot 150 times until she gets it right. She'll do what she wants. There's nothing that would stand in the way of that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
David Franklin, I'd ask you to step forward now, if you would, please. And
I'll just make a quick comment.
Sorry, Rod, go ahead. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Rabbi, I live on Kensington. I played bridge until the COVID pandemic every week in your lovely building. And I play croquet across the street. So I'm very familiar with it. And indeed, I also watched the Leonard Cohen special where your choir was speaking as well. So a wonderful speech, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
David, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, President Jim, for giving me the opportunity to thank Rabbi Adam. It is both an honor and a pleasure to do so. It's an honor because Rabbi Adam plays a dominant role in the Jewish community. He has initiated many programs at the Shaar. One of them is the Shaar Cares. For example, during this terrible period, every Friday night, my dear wife, Sarah, and I listen to his sermons, online, of course. He is a man of many accomplishments and leadership. We're blessed to have him as the rabbi of the Shaar Hashomayim. And it is a pleasure, I mentioned, because I got my bar mitzvah from Wilfred Shushat when I was 13 years old. And a personal pleasure, Rabbi Adam married my dear wife who's sitting right beside me in May 2015. We got married at the Shaar, of course, and Rabbi Adam performed the service which we remember for the rest of our lives. So indeed, it's a pleasure to see him online. We only wish that the Shaar would open for business, as you call it, so we can see each other again personally. So thank you very much. There much of the presentation I did not know about. One thing, I'll put a footnote. If you go to Trois-Rivières, you will see plaques on the main street. On the main street, after all, they were Jewish, and you know Trois-Rivières is more than predominantly Catholic, honoring the contribution of the Hart family to the history of Trois-Rivières. Also, the Hart family were denied, as he said, to be members, but they were re-elected constantly. And finally, the Quebec legislature passed a law allowing, if I can use that word, total freedom of the Jewish religion so that they could take their seat. So the Jews have contributed a great deal to the history of Canada and particularly of Quebec. And Adam, you are part of this history. Thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you. Thank you all. Beautiful words.
I was going to say, if you have a rebuttal, you can go ahead now, Adam.
No, that was perfect. And if anyone has any questions throughout, I try to make myself easy to find. Rabbi@theshaar.org, and would love to hear from you. But thank you all.
And we'll make sure that link goes in the bulletin also.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat right now also.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, everybody.